everyone here is a huge fan of the show, and you got a huge applause when your name came up in the credits. So I assume, like myself,
I've seen the movie a bunch of times, but I keep wanting to sneak in to see it with people who don't know who I mean, what are the odds of this? That I'm going to see with people who But I always want to see what happens if the piano player still gets a laugh and people don't know that it's me. But that wouldn't happen in this.
the piano player got a huge laugh.
It's my finest work.
It is. I mean, Richard, he was like, I didn't even tell Jason to do that. He just did that on his own.
It's a gift.
You lost your calling as an actor.
I think everyone else has lost my calling.
Well, I think everyone here is really familiar with the story and loves the show, but I want to talk with you a little bit about the movie because you wrote the show starting in 1999. It premiered in Chicago, and then it played on Broadway in 2002, and here we are 13 years later. Why now? Why the movie now for you?
I don't want to suggest that I had any control over the why now of it. When the show came out, fairly quickly actually, I started getting letters, emails from people who would say, hey, I want to make a movie out of your play, and they'd be college students or something, and I'd be like, no. And there was a lot of that, and then I remember I met with a big movie producer, and he said, we want to do the last 5 years. I said, oh, hey, that would be great. He said, we should have like a real, it's going to need a real star. And I said, and he said, what do you think about Alicia Keys?
What?
And I said, well, I don't know, sure, Alicia, and that's where the end of that conversation was, so perhaps he's still developing that. But so it took a long time, and the record, the CD was very successful for Shikaboom, and so Kurt Deutsch, who runs the label, called me, and he said, I think, the record business is a stupid business to be in. I should make movies, because that's a really sensible business to be in.
Right.
He said, and the last 5 years has done so well for us, I think that should be our first movie. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about, but sure, whatever. And he said, do we have the right to make the movie? And at this point, I was sort of like, no one's ever going to make a movie. Sure, go ahead, make the movie. And so I gave him that. And then like every year or so, from that point on, he would say, oh, would you like to meet with this person? Or, oh, I'm getting really close to financing. And so I would be like, yeah, sure. And I'd go meet with them dutifully, assuming nothing was ever going to happen. And at a certain point, I met Richard LaGravenese. And I said, hi, how are you? I was a huge fan of The Fisher King. I must have seen it like 9 times when I was in college. I loved his work, and I was like, wow, I'm meeting Richard LaGravenese, and he was like, wow, I'm meeting Jason Robert Brown. So that was really great. And then, he was like, so I'm going to write this, and we both said it's never going to get made, but it'll be fun. And so he would write it, and we would meet. And then one day I got a call, do you want to meet Anna Kendrick? And I said, well, who doesn't want to meet Anna Kendrick? Everyone on earth wants to meet Anna Kendrick. So she came to our house in Los Angeles. I was still living there then. And she sang like 4 notes. I said, yeah, this is fine. If you want to do the movie, you can do the movie. I said, stop Anna Kendrick. No, you must not do this. So I called Kurt and I said, yes, Anna Kendrick, Richard LaGravenese, great, fine. And then all of a sudden it was like, there was Anna Kendrick and there was Richard LaGravenese, and there was sort of like a movie happening. And then they were like, we have to find the guy. And I was like, well, good luck. And we really did. We had like, people would send tapes, like action movie stars, so I can't tell you, but they're like, God, and they would they're sitting in their hotel room, and if I didn't believe in you.
Oh gosh.
And I'd sit there and I'd watch these things on my, computer. I'd just be like, what's going to happen? Because you really do need sort of like a name in order to get the money to make the movie. Who's going to pay to see some guy who no one's ever heard of? And then Richard said, no, we need the perfect person. And he said, have you seen Jeremy Jordan? And I said, I actually haven't, because like I said, I was living over there, so I hadn't seen Newsies and I hadn't seen Bonnie and Clyde, so I didn't know who this guy was. And he said, well, watch this. And he showed me the tape that he had made of Jeremy doing If I Didn't Believe in You. And I said, well, if you could get him, why would you want anybody else? Just get him. And I said, but don't you, what happened to I need the famous person and all that? And Richard said, wait, we can do it. We can do it. We're going to make it work because we have the best person. I said, hey, great by me. And so that was the vague story of how it sort of all came together. But honestly, Jeremy was hired. He said to me today that he thinks he remembered that it was on Valentine's Day 2 years ago that he got the call, that he got the job. and we filmed in June. So I mean, it was like the whole journey took. We couldn't set the shooting schedule until we actually had a Jamie, but we had him, and then it was like, we gotta go. So it was all really. We never believed it was happening until honestly. I needed to be here tonight so I could believe that it happened, because I still didn't believe that it happened, but apparently it did, so okay. Wouldn't it be great if this were a really elaborate ruse?
I think we have 200 witnesses tonight that it actually did happen, so that's good.
No, my Twitter feed suggests to me that it really happened. I've watched it 94 times already, I've had so much coffee and I've cried so many times!
Talk to me a little bit about working with Richard, because I think that's been a really interesting collaboration, because on stage it's, solo numbers, one character sings one song, another character sings another, and Richard worked on this adaptation, I think, for like 5 or so years. What was it like kind of working with him on adapting it to the screen?
Oh, Richard's a jerk, so it was, Richard really, when I met with him initially, he said, I want to bring this thing. This is what I want to do. I don't want to do some other thing. I want to do the last 5 years. And I said, well, listen, it's hard. It's hard enough to do it on stage. I don't exactly know what it's going to look like if you make a movie of it. He said, I know what it looks like. I know up here exactly what it looks like. I said, great. And so he did a draft, and we sat in Los Angeles, and we walked through the draft scene by scene, and just sort of, I said to him, I don't know about this, and I don't know. I mean, back then, the wedding was still going to be in the lake in Central Park, which is what it is in the play. It turned out logistically that filming on the lake was impossible. But so there were a bunch of ideas that were all sort of germinating in there, and he never knew how to do Shmuel. He always would say, "I don't know what to do with this," and so there'd be just like 5 blank pages where Shmuel.
Did he ask you to write an original song initially?
Well, they kept saying to me, don't you think that maybe like a different idea for this? And I would be like, it may be that the best thing I could do is write a new song. I'm not going to. So, you're stuck with Shmuel. And they were like, maybe you could cut it. I said, you show me where the cut is and I'll think about it. And they could never figure out where to cut it because Shmuel is very hard to cut. And so it was going to be animated for a long time. There was going to be little Shmuel creatures wandering around the city. But the most important thing is that everything came back to me. That every time he would write a draft, he sent it to me, and he said, "What do you think about this?" And so he was always wanting to hear what my thoughts are on it. And there are certain points at which he pretty substantially, within this context, he pretty substantially diverged from what my original intentions were. But there were places where when I saw it on the page, I said, go with it. Go see what it is. This is not my play. This is your movie. And it's your movie based on my play. So as long as I can sort of buy it, go with it. It's weird enough for me that it's set in sort of relatively contemporary times. To me, the play is very much set in 1993 to 1998. That's sort of, I know what that is. And when we did the revival, it was like we had to find old copies of Backstage magazine because they don't look the same anymore, and I know that's what it's supposed to look like. And then for this, it was very different because it's all supposed to be sort of within the last couple of years, and there's no more borders, and so I had to change it to a Target. But I was willing to go with it because he said to me what he saw was something that happened right, was happening right now. I said, great, go with it. So that was our experience. It was really. He was supporting this thing that I wrote, and I was very much supporting his vision of what he saw in his head, and I trusted him, and it was worth trusting him, because, he wrote The Fisher King, he can do whatever he wants.
Were you ever hesitant to have the 2 characters on screen together the whole time?
I wasn't hesitant about it. I wasn't sure you'd ever make sense of it. Because to me, the structure of it is part of what makes it work. And the structure of the movie doesn't work the same way. I don't think that it makes the same kind of sense. You get there, but it's a much more impressionistic thing. It's not as rigorous of a structural puzzle. But, that was inevitable once you put the 2 characters on screen. One of the things that they tried really hard, but the thing is, I'm wearing clothes that I bought 5 years ago. 5 years doesn't actually look a whole lot different. So, it's not going to look like, 2011 really looks wildly different from 2012.
Yeah.
But actually, I have the same shoes. It's all basically the same. And so it's like there's hair of color, or there's facial hair, or things like that. And they tried. So by your 9th viewing, by the time you're on Twitter, you'll be seeing all of the clues that they laid. But he changed some of the chronology. Some of the events happen simultaneously that are originally written to happen 4 years apart, and stuff like that. So I still can get a little like this when I watch the movie, because there's a very specific version of it in my head. But this is rigorous in its own way. It's just not the same one that I did.
Are there any specific moments you can recall where Richard's adaptation on screen was not what you intended as a writer, but you were like, oh, that's great, that's something that I really like that you're doing?
Certainly, like I said, the wedding scene, they just couldn't film on the pond, and I was like, well, I don't know what it is if you're not in a rowboat, but all of a sudden they were just walking into the gazebo, and I thought, oh, that's fine. For me, the pushing the door open in Chicks and Goddess is when the movie sort of takes off. You're just sort of like, oh, we're going to do that movie now. And so, there's all the ex-girlfriends, and you're just sort of like, oh, great, I'm on board. Whatever you want to do, go ahead. Good. So that was one of the places where I don't know what this is supposed to be, but I think it looks so great. And that when all the Shapiros in Washington Heights come out,
yes,
I'm deliriously happy. And one of the funders of the movie, one of the producers, is actually the lead Shapiro. He's the oldest guy, with the beard, and he's sort of standing there, and I'm always like, he looks so proud because of course he's like, I'm in my movie. But, he looks like the Shapiros.
There's a few producers in the movie. Kurt's in the movie too.
Kurt's in the movie, and Sherry's in the movie, and Richard's in the movie. I saw the movie like 3 times before I realized Richard was in it. But I'm actually even worse because I saw the movie 3 times before I realized my wife is in it. So I knew where she was, but she's like, "Do you see that place where you see my face?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, yes, absolutely." And then the 3rd time I was like, "Oh God, there it is." Okay.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the music, because as we've talked about before, I mean, it's a very intimate musical on stage. It's a 6-piece band, and on screen you were able to kind of expand the sound, do some new orchestrations, do some new arrangements. What was that process like for you?
The reason it's 6 pieces in the theater is the same reason that the story sort of is structured the way it is. I'm very rigorous about building a world. And so the world of the play is very circumscribed, and once you get boxed into those 6 musicians, that does a certain thing to you. And so if all of a sudden halfway through you started hearing an electric guitar or you started hearing drums playing, it would take you out of this little tiny world that you're in, and everything about the puzzle of the play makes that necessary. But in the movie, you can't do that. I mean, they're out in New York City. They're filming on location. So unless you were doing some weird sort of Dogville kind of movie, you're sort of present and in the world. And so, as bizarre as it is to say about a musical, what happens when you film things is it becomes, in a sense, a lot more documentary. You are documenting a thing, and people recognize it. And so, the event of people singing on a stage is one thing, but the event of people singing on a screen is very different. And I felt like if I had just left it with the 6 pieces through the whole movie, I wasn't always supporting emotionally what the characters needed to do. And something like Moving Too Fast, within the context of 6 people on the stage, it sort of rocks out. But if I had just left the 6 people in the movie, you would have seen them like, there's all these people dancing and there's all that, and there's no drummer, and it's just sort of like a bunch of, it would have sounded like what it was, the 3 Jews sort of playing the, guitar. So there was a lot of that. And my original idea really was to really blow it out. I was gonna, the Shmuel was gonna be with the, French horns and the trumpets player. I was really gonna go to town. And when I started doing it, I really thought, you know what, that isn't the world. I sort of found where the limit of the world was, because I already had horn charts for Moving Too Fast, because I do it with my band. I was like, well, that's easy, I'll just put those in the movie and then I get paid for them. And so I was and as I was about to record them, I listened to them and I went, no, the horns aren't this movie. You can't have the brass section in the movie. I don't know why, I never know what the rules are that work in my head, but I knew that it was not, that I didn't want to do it that way. So it just became a lot of strings. So for the next 10 minutes, which I really did have to reorchestrate from scratch to do this, the next 10 minutes, it's 20 string players plus the rhythm section, and that was the biggest section we got. And then there were all sorts of little adjustments we made. There's actually an extra guitar player in almost every song. I think he's not in Still Hurting, and he's not in if I didn't believe in you. But other than that, I think there's always a second guitar player, which is Matt Hinckley, and he's always playing other stuff. But the rest of the core band was actually the very band that played it at Second Stage, because they knew it. I mean, they were all. That's when we recorded the movie while they did the recording session and went and did a show that night. So we were all in the middle of it. I thought, well, it'd be stupid not to use them. They know how it goes. And so we used them for the pre-records, and then we hired a whole bunch of other musicians to do the big overdubs after the vocals were done.
Definitely, and I mean, like we talked about, you wrote this in the late 90s, you said it kind of in the mid 90s, and now seeing it in 2015, it's a personal story for you. What is it like watching it now? Do you still feel very close to the story, or is there some distance?
There's a lot of distance now. When we did it in Chicago, it was a beautiful experience. Chicago was sort of the best of the experiences for me, because nobody was there. It was sort of very insulated from the planet Earth, and nobody expected anything. And it was only my third show, and so I sort of was like, nobody knew what this was going to be. And it got these great reviews, and the audience was all 143 years old, but other than that, and then we came to New York, and all of a sudden I felt trapped by the show, and I started to feel sort of like I had created this thing that was going to perpetuate this whole chapter of my life that I really wanted to move on from, and I couldn't. And it was deliberate. I had written a show that was, don't have to be coy about it. It was largely about a marriage that fell apart that was not dissimilar to my own marriage. And so I was sitting and having to be in it. At least I played it, which was easier than having to sit and watch it every night. But I played it, but I was I felt sort of trapped by it. And so then I went away from it, and I didn't deal with it much. And by the time the revival came around in 2013, I hadn't really been in the middle of the last 5 years for a long time, and instead of feeling connected to it that way, I sort of felt like their uncle all of a sudden. I sort of felt like Jamie and Kathy were these kids, and I was like, oh, you kids. You'll figure it out. I'm sorry it went this way, but it's all going to be fine. It'll be fine. And so when I watch it now, it's even one step further from that, especially because I had so little to do with this particular interpretation. And also, their heads are so huge. I don't get caught up the same way. I mean, Georgia and I both, we are very, we sit and we watch it, and we know what some of these things were in my head, and so it's like we hold hands, we're like, oh, we have to go through that again, and then we sort of do it, but it sort of feels like it's a different world. It doesn't do this to me anymore. Now it's what Georgia says. She's the only person who thinks that the show has a happy ending, and I happen to think it has a happy ending now too.
Aww. That's a sweet note. And I would love to get some questions from the audience as well. Just want to raise your hand and project.
You don't have to project too hard.
When you wrote Nobody Needs to Know, did you imagine that he was singing it all to one woman or to several women?
Nobody Needs to Know, what she asked, did I imagine that Nobody Needs to Know would be the three different women in the movie. Now, I actually, that wasn't even in the screenplay that I saw, so it wasn't until I saw the first cut of the movie that I saw it with the three women. And I was a little weirded out by it, because I thought, I don't know if now it looks like Jamie has a problem. But it's also, I gave it up to God. It's I think it's valid. It's just it's certainly not what it is in the show. That's very different. But also, how many shots in the movie can you have of a guy standing alone in an apartment singing to one person for 6 minutes? I mean, thank God there's other women walking around. Lose your mind. But so that's I appreciate it, and I'm grateful for it. And also the women, they're very attractive. So I don't have a problem with that. But no, it's certainly not what was up here. But I've gotten used to it now. I can get behind it.
The first one's Jeremy's wife.
The first one is Jeremy's wife. I don't look at her.
Another question?
He gets to cheat on.
I know. I was talking to him from premiere. He's like, I'm cheating on my wife with my wife. Right here.
Well, 13 actually. I mean, I can't imagine one has anything to do with another. 13 was optioned by Sony Pictures. I mean, it's like that's like that big people with big money making big movies, which means it's almost certainly never going to happen. But so that, I mean, I'm supposed to be looking at a screenplay. You know, I was supposed to arrive on February 1st, and so now you know how that's going. But, so that's 13. You know, I think Parade would be really filmic. I think it would be really cinematic. You can clap all you want. But I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, the only way, honestly, the only way a movie that expensive would happen is if Brad Pitt said, "I am Leo Frank" in my heart. And you're sort of like, okay, and you know, and you go with it, and that's sort of how that occurs. I mean, I imagine that if Rob Marshall called me tomorrow and said, "I am Mr. Big Shot and I want to make a Parade movie," he might be able to make it happen if Meryl Streep was Lucille. I mean, but I can't imagine. I mean, so other than that, there's Bridges of Madison County, which I don't think is going to be another movie yet. I mean, you know, we can all hope. But and Honeymoon in Vegas, which I'm happy if anyone wants to make a movie out of it. Of course, it already was one. And then there's just Songs for a New World. So I think we may be sort of hitting peak Jason in terms of the movie exposure. But that's fine for right now.
Another question?